The observation deck smelled of burnt ozone and recycled fear. Commander Vex'thaal pressed 3 of his 6 manipulator appendages against the transparent viewport, watching the human vessel drift closer to the dreadnought, like a wounded insect approaching a predator's maw. 30 cycles. That's how long the war had consumed everything. 30 cycles of watching his people bleed across star systems they'd controlled for millennia. And now, finally, they'd captured one of the cursed beings responsible. Status? His voice resonated through the chamber with the particular timbre that demanded immediate response. Lieutenant Cormix's dorsal plates fluttered nervously. The specimen is contained in holding chamber 7, Commander. Medical scans indicate standard human physiology. Female. Approximately 28 stellar rotations of age by their reckoning. Armaments? None detected. She carried only data tablets and what appears to be educational materials. Vex'thaal's primary eye swiveled to regard his subordinate. Educational materials. During a combat insertion? Yes, Commander. The boarding team found her in what appeared to be a makeshift classroom aboard their vessel. There were 12 human juveniles with her. Now that was fascinating in the most disturbing way possible. Humans. The galaxy's newest nightmare. The species that had appeared from their isolated mudball 15 stellar cycles ago and proceeded to make absolute mockery of every military doctrine the sovereignty had refined over 6,000 years of expansion. They didn't follow rules. They didn't retreat when mathematically defeated. They certainly didn't bring children to war zones. Vex'thaal had studied every fragment of intelligence about them. Physically, they were laughable. Soft skin, single redundant organ systems, ridiculously short lifespans. Yet, somehow, these fragile bipeds had shattered 3 sovereignty fleets, liberated 8 occupied worlds, and turned the tide of conflicts that should have been resolved in their first engagement. The key, every analyst agreed, was their communication system. That bizarre verbal language that seemed to operate on 17 different contextual layers simultaneously. Sovereignty translation matrices couldn't crack it. The sounds were simple enough to reproduce, but the meanings shifted like quantum states depending on factors that remained utterly mysterious. I want to see her. Cormix's plates clattered with alarm. Commander, protocol suggests maintaining distance until protocol. Vex'thaal's laugh echoed with harmonics that made the lieutenant physically recoil. Protocol suggested we'd conquer Earth in 40 solar rotations. Protocol assured us their weapons were primitive. Protocol has been catastrophically wrong about everything concerning these creatures. I'm going to talk to her. Sir, she cannot understand sovereignty standard. Then we'll find another way. Prepare a linguistics interface suite. And Cormix? Have tactical teams positioned outside the chamber. If she so much as breathes incorrectly, sterilize the entire section. 3 subcycles later, Vex'thaal stood outside, holding Chamber 7, watching the human through the reinforced observation panel. She sat cross-legged on the bare floor, apparently unconcerned by her captivity. Her appearance matched the database profiles. Bilateral symmetry, minimal body hair, those unsettling forward-facing predator eyes that tracked movement with disturbing precision. She was singing? The sound filtered through the audio pickups, and Vex'thaal felt his internal temperature drop 2 degrees. That's what they did. Humans. They made those noises that somehow contained more information than should be physically possible within acoustic wavelengths. He activated the chamber entrance. The door dissolved with a whisper of displaced molecules. The human stopped singing. Those eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made his combat instinct scream. She smiled. Creator's mercy, she smiled, revealing those flat, grinding teeth that somehow also served as weapons in their psychological warfare. Well, she said, the sounds tumbling from her mouth in that impossible cascade of meaning. You're certainly more impressive in person than in the briefing hollows. The translation matrix spat out gibberish. Vex'thaal had expected that. He activated the linguistics suite, projecting a three-dimensional matrix of sovereignty pictographs into the space between them. His vocal synthesizer produced a grinding approximation of human phonetics. You understand? She tilted her head, an expression that database entries suggested indicated curiosity or confusion. Oh, you're trying to speak English. Points for effort. But that sounded like a garbage disposal having an existential crisis. More untranslatable noise. Fascinating. Vex'thaal adjusted the synthesis parameters, trying again. We need. Communicate. The human stood up, brushing dust from her clothing with those dexterous five-fingered appendages. Right. Communication. That's kind of my thing, actually. She approached the projection matrix, studying it with clear interest. Visual symbol substitution. Clever, but it's not going to work. She pointed at a glyph representing negotiation. Then, at one, meaning surrender. Then laughed. Actually laughed. The sound made Vex'thaal's defensive membranes twitch. You think those concepts are the same, don't you? To your species, they're probably synonyms. See, that's your first problem. Vex'thaal cycled through several color spectrums, a physiological response he couldn't quite control. This creature was mocking him, or educating him, or both simultaneously. How did humans do that? He tried a different approach, pulling up tactical displays. Images of destroyed sovereignty vessels, statistics of battles lost. Then he pointed at the human, then at the displays, then made a gesture that universally meant, explain. She studied the displays with those predator eyes. Ah, you want to know why you're losing. She walked closer, close enough that Vex'thaal's security implants screamed warnings. It's not our technology. It's not our tactics. It's not even our stubborn refusal to know when we're beaten, though that helps. She tapped the side of her head. It's this. Language. Communication. The thing you can't crack. Vex'thaal forced himself to remain still. She was right. Every captured human device had been reverse-engineered. Every weapon system analyzed. Every tactical doctrine dissected. But their language remained as impenetrable as collapsed matter. He brought up a new display. A simple exchange. Sovereignty pictographs on one side, human words on the other. He gestured between them. The human, this impossibly fragile thing that could crush his entire civilization, smiled again. You want me to teach you English? Yes. Creator's light? Yes. That was exactly what he needed. She walked in a small circle, a behavior database entries labeled as contemplation. Then she stopped, fixing him with that predator stare. Okay, I'll do it. Vex'thaal felt hope surge through his neural network for the first time in cycles. This was it. This was the breakthrough that could end the war, save his people, restore the sovereignty's dominance on one condition, she continued. Of course, there was a condition. Humans always had conditions. He gestured for her to continue. You let me go. You release those kids from my ship, and you provide safe transport back to human-controlled space. She crossed her arms. Another gesture, his database labeled as defensive resolution. In exchange, I'll teach you everything you want to know about English. Grammar, syntax, contextual interpretation, idioms, the whole catastrophically complicated mess. Vex'thaal's strategic processors went into overdrive. The offer was absurdly generous, suspiciously generous. Humans didn't make deals this favorable without hidden clauses. Every intelligence report confirmed they were tactically devious to a degree that suggested evolutionary selection for psychological warfare. But what choice did he have? The war was bleeding the sovereignty dry. Fleets that should have been policing trade routes were burning at human frontier worlds. Resources that should have been developing new territories were being diverted to military production. The Council of Hierarchs was fragmenting under pressure from the losses. If he could crack their language, understand their communication, predict their strategies. He activated his personal communicator. Cormix, prepared documentation for a prisoner exchange agreement. Standard terms, with additional clauses for ongoing consultation. The human's expression shifted to something his database labeled as amused satisfaction. Warning flags appeared in his tactical overlay. Why did she look pleased? Excellent, she said. Oh, one more thing. Before we start, I should probably introduce myself properly. She extended one hand, a human greeting gesture he'd seen in archived footage. My name is Dr. Maya Torres, xenolinguistics specialist, cultural anthropology researcher, and professional student of human communication systems. Student. The word hung in the recycled air like a suspended blade. Vex'thaal's 4 primary neural clusters processed the implications simultaneously. Student, not teacher, not master, not expert. Student. You. He struggled with the synthesizer. Study? Of course I study. Language isn't static. It evolves. It changes. Every conversation creates new meanings. Every generation invents new expressions. Her smile widened. It's too big, too messy, too beautifully chaotic. But you said, I said I'd teach you everything I know. And I will. Absolutely. But here's the thing about human language, about English specifically. She leaned forward, and Vex'thaal's combat systems screamed at him to maintain distance. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't understand. It's not like math, where answers are absolute. It breaks its own rules for fun. She gestured at the displays, still showing sovereignty defeats. That's why you're losing. You think language is a code to crack, a puzzle to solve. You believe there's a key that unlocks everything. There isn't? Oh, Commander. She laughed again, and this time Vex'thaal understood it was genuine amusement, mixed with something darker. Pity, perhaps. There are a million keys, and they all open different doors. And behind those doors are more doors. We've been speaking English for centuries, and we still argue about what words mean. We still invent new ones. We still change the old ones. Vex'thaal felt something cold settling in his central neural cluster. He'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. This wasn't a prisoner exchange. This wasn't an intelligence coup. This was a human doing what humans did best, turning every situation into something incomprehensible. So, he needed to regain control of this interaction. You cannot teach. I didn't say that. She moved to the wall, leaning against it with that casual flexibility human spines allowed. I can teach. I'm actually pretty good at it. But you need to understand what you're asking for. She held up one finger. You're not asking me to translate words. You're asking me to translate a culture, a history, a way of thinking that's fundamentally different from yours. Second finger. You're asking me to explain why the same sentence can mean completely different things depending on who says it, when they say it, and what they had for breakfast that morning. Third finger. You're asking me to make sense of a communication system that includes sarcasm, irony, metaphor, hyperbole, and 17 other techniques specifically designed to mean the opposite of what we're actually saying. She lowered her hand. But sure, I can teach you. It'll only take, about 20 years of intensive study. Maybe 30, if you're a slow learner. Cormix's voice crackled through his communicator. Commander, the Council demands a status update. They're inquiring about the Strategic Intelligence Gathering Operation. Strategic Intelligence Gathering Operation. Right. The thing that was currently collapsing into educational absurdity. Vex'thaal made a decision. Possibly a terrible one. But command required making choices with incomplete information. Dr. Torres, you will teach. I will learn. And when I understand enough, you go free. And the kids from my ship? Them also. She studied him for a long moment. Those predator eyes, evaluating, calculating, doing whatever psychological processing humans did inside their ludicrously overcomplicated brains. "Deal," she finally said. "But fair warning, Commander. By the time we're done, you're going to wish you'd just shot my ship out of space when you had the chance." "Why?" Her smile turned into something his database had no classification for. "Because I'm not just going to teach you English. I'm going to teach you how humans think. And trust me, that's way more dangerous than any weapon we've built." Vex'thaal stared at this small, soft, impossibly fragile creature who had somehow turned her capture into, what? A teaching position? A long-term consultation contract? An educational hostage situation? The war had been incomprehensible before. Now, it was about to become educational. Creator help him. He just enlisted in the most dangerous military operation in sovereignty history. He was going back to school. Human school. "When do we start?" he asked, synthesizer struggling with the uncertainty in his neural patterns. Dr. Maya Torres picked up one of her data tablets, activating it with practiced ease. "How about right now?" Lesson 1. The difference between what words mean and what people mean when they use those words. She pulled up a text file, displaying it on the chamber's projection system. Let's start with something simple. The word fine. 4 letters, 1 syllable. Should be easy, right? Vex'thaal examined the word through his translation matrix. Acceptable. Adequate. Satisfactory. Sure. Now let me ask you a question, and you tell me what I actually mean. She cleared her throat, then said in a particular tone, "How am I doing in captivity?" "Oh, I'm fine." The translation matrix agreed with his assessment. Fine meant satisfactory. But something about her tone, her expression, the microscopic changes in her posture. "You are not fine," Vex'thaal said slowly. "Bingo. Gold star. You just learned that humans say one thing and mean another all the time. We call it subtext, and it's absolutely everywhere in our communication." She advanced the display. Now, imagine an entire language built on that principle, where the literal meaning is often the least important meaning, where context determines everything, where the same sentence can be a compliment, an insult, a threat, or a joke, depending on 50 variables you can't even detect. Vex'thaal felt his thermal regulation system struggling. This is impossible. It's improbable. But you're going to learn it anyway. She grinned. Because I'm a really good teacher. And you, Commander, are going to be my most motivated student. She wasn't wrong. His entire civilization depended on this. No pressure. Outside the chamber, somewhere in the vast mechanical bowels of the dreadnought, alert systems registered another human fleet movement. More ships, more incomprehensible tactics, more defeats waiting to happen. But in holding Chamber 7, a war of a different kind was beginning. One where the weapons were words, the battlefield was meaning, and the victor would be whoever could understand the other first. Vex'thaal settled into a learning posture, activating every recording system in his neural network. Class was in session, and for the first time since this cursed war began, he felt something other than dread. He felt curiosity. Creator helped them all. Commander Vex'thaal hadn't slept in 4 cycles. His species could manage 7 before cognitive functions began deteriorating. But right now, exhaustion felt like a distant concept compared to the absolute nightmare unfolding in his neural processors. Dr. Maya Torres sat across from him in what had been converted from a holding chamber into something she called a classroom. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd captured her. She was technically his prisoner. Yet somehow, he felt like the one being detained. All right. She pulled up a new display, looking far too energized for someone in captivity. Pop quiz. Tell me what this sentence means. Yeah, that's just great. Vex'thaal consulted his translation matrix, which had been updated 17 times in the past 3 cycles, and still seemed utterly inadequate. It expresses approval, satisfaction with an outcome. Maya's expression did that thing. That waymail shift that meant he was catastrophically wrong, but she was going to enjoy explaining why. Context, she said, holding up a finger. A medical officer tells you that your entire fleet just got wiped out by a single human corvette using nothing but mining explosives and truly spectacular amounts of duct tape. You respond, "Yeah, that's just great. What do you mean?" Oh no. The opposite, Vex'thaal said, feeling his chromatophores shift to colors associated with confusion and growing horror. Disapproval, frustration, possibly sarcasm. Now you're getting it. She beamed at him like he'd accomplished something extraordinary instead of barely grasping the basics of linguistic treachery. Sarcasm is humanity's favorite weapon. We'll say exactly what we don't mean, and somehow other humans know. It's beautiful, it's efficient, and it's absolutely untranslatable if you don't understand the context. Lieutenant Cormix's voice interrupted through the communicator. "Commander, the hierarchs are requesting another progress report. They're asking when we'll have actionable intelligence." Actionable intelligence. Right. Because learning that humans weaponized linguistic contradiction was exactly what the Council wanted to hear. "Tell them we're making breakthrough progress," Vex'thaal responded, which was technically accurate if breakthroughs could be measured in mounting existential dread. Maya raised an eyebrow. Another gesture he'd learned meant skepticism or amusement, depending on 17 factors he still couldn't identify. "You're learning." That was a very diplomatic response, which is another way of saying you dodged the question completely. Is diplomacy also sarcasm? Sometimes, often, mostly. She laughed. See, here's the thing about human communication. We've got about a dozen different ways to not say what we actually mean, and we use all of them constantly. Sarcasm, euphemism, understatement, hyperbole, metaphor. We're basically running multiple encryption layers simultaneously, and we decode them automatically without thinking about it. Vex'thaal's tactical processors attempted to model this as a military problem. So, every human conversation is encoded? Not encoded. Nuanced. There's a difference. She stood up, pacing the chamber. Encoding implies there's a key. Nuance means the meaning emerges from everything around the words. Your tone, your history with the person, the social context, what happened 5 minutes ago, what might happen tomorrow. She stopped pacing, turning to face him directly. Let me give you an example. If I say, "We need to talk," what does that mean? The translation matrix offered, verbal communication is required, that you wish to exchange. Information? Wrong. It means something bad is about to happen. That phrase is a warning, a prelude to difficult conversation. Every human knows it. We hear those 4 words and our stress responses activate immediately. But the words themselves mean nothing. Or everything. Both. She grinned. Everything. Welcome to English, Commander, where the rules are made up and the definitions don't matter. A proximity alarm shrieked through the dreadnought. Vex'thaal's combat systems activated instinctively. Report, Cormix sounded panicked. Human fleet detected at grid coordinates 779er. 3 destroyers and... Commander, one of them is broadcasting a message. In sovereignty standard. That was new. Terrifyingly new. Play it. The message crackled through the speakers. The voice was human, unmistakably so. But the words were sovereignty standard, perfect pronunciation, flawless grammar, sovereignty, dreadnought designation infinite authority. This is Captain Rebecca Wright of the Terran defense vessel Steadfast. We understand you have Dr. Maya Torres aboard. We're here to discuss her release. Please respond within 1 standard interval, or we'll assume negotiations have failed and proceed accordingly. Maya tilted her head, listening. Then she started laughing. not the polite classroom laugh. A genuine, from-the-belly laugh that made her whole body shake. "What's funny?" Vex'thaal demanded. "Your people learned our language. They're communicating. This is what we wanted." "Oh, Commander." She wiped tears from her eyes. "They didn't learn sovereignty standard." Rebecca probably spent about 3 hours with a translation program and memorized that speech phonetically. She doesn't understand a word of what she just said. But it was perfect. Because humans are really good at mimicking sounds, we can reproduce almost any phonetic pattern we hear. Parrots do it. Children do it. Doesn't mean we understand it. She gestured at the display. "Rebecca is my colleague. Former student, actually. She knows exactly 3 phrases in sovereignty standard. That speech, 'Please don't shoot,' and something incredibly inappropriate that I taught her as a joke during linguistics training." Vex'thaal felt reality shifting again. Humans could produce sounds without meaning. They could mimic without comprehension. They could appear to communicate while actually, what? Bluffing? "How do we respond?" Cormix asked. Maya held up a hand. "Let me. I'll translate." She activated the communication array, speaking in that fluid human language. "Hey Becky, it's Maya. I'm fine. Not being tortured? Actually teaching an alien commander about irregular verbs and the subjunctive mood? Tell command, I'm good for another week before extraction becomes necessary. Also, you totally butchered that pronunciation. We're going to have words about your study habits." The response came back immediately, equally incomprehensible. But Maya's expression softened. She says, "Command is freaking out. The fleet is ready to do something dramatically stupid if needed, and she's apologizing for the pronunciation while also reminding me that I'm a terrible teacher who assigns too much homework." She threatened military action and complained about education simultaneously. Vex'thaal was developing what he suspected might be a migraine, despite his species not typically suffering from them. Yep, multitasking. Humans are excellent at it. Maya turned back to her displays. "Now, where were we? Oh right, idioms. Let's talk about phrases that make absolutely no literal sense, but everyone understands anyway." Dr. Torres. Vex'thaal struggled to keep his vocal harmonics steady. "Your fleet is outside. They're prepared to attack. Shouldn't we negotiate your release?" "We had a deal, Commander. I teach until you understand." "Do you understand?" "No." "Then I'm still teaching." She pulled up a new file. Idiom number 1. It's raining cats and dogs. This does not mean felines and canines are falling from the sky. It means heavy rain. Nobody knows why. We just accept it. Outside, 3 human destroyers maintained attack formation. Inside, a linguistics professor continued her lesson as if orbital bombardment wasn't a distinct possibility. Humanity's psychological warfare was more effective than any weapon system Vex'thaal had encountered. 5 cycles later, something had fundamentally changed in Vex'thaal's understanding of reality. He stood on the command deck, watching tactical displays update with human fleet movements. Before Maya's instruction, these patterns had seemed random, chaotic, unpredictable. Now, he could see it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to recognize what he was looking at. The humans weren't being random, they were communicating. Fleet formations spelled messages. Attack patterns contained embedded information. Even their weapon trajectories followed linguistic structures he was beginning to recognize. They'd turned warfare itself into a language. Cormix. His voice carried new harmonics. Understanding. Respect. Fear. Pull up the engagement at Kepler Station, the one we classified as tactical insanity. The battle replay materialized. Humanity had sacrificed 2 frigates to destroy a supply depot that seemed strategically worthless. Every sovereignty analyst had concluded the humans were simply incompetent. But now, watching the attack vectors, the timing, the specific targets, they weren't attacking the depot, Vex'thaal said slowly. They were sending a message to their other fleets. The attack pattern it's linguistic. They encoded tactical information in the assault itself. Cormix's plates rattled. That's impossible. For us? Yes. For them? He gestured at the display. They think in communication. Everything is language, even violence. Maya had explained it during their last session. Humans didn't separate communication from action. Every gesture contained meaning. Every choice told a story. They were a species that evolved complex language centers and then applied linguistic thinking to literally everything. Commander, one of the sensor technicians interrupted. The human fleet is moving. New formation. Vex'thaal watched the ships rearrange themselves, and then, using the principles Maya had been drilling into his neural network, he saw it. The formation spelled out a human phrase, in spatial positioning. 3 destroyers and 2 support craft arranged in a pattern that, if you understood how humans used visual metaphor, clearly stated, "We're willing to wait." He activated communications, speaking directly to Maya's chamber. Dr. Torres, your fleet is writing sentences with their ships. Her laugh came through clear. Took you long enough to notice. We've been doing that since the war started. Drove your analysts crazy because they kept trying to find tactical advantages when we were just leaving notes for each other. That's ridiculous. That's humanity. We'll turn anything into communication if you give us half a chance. Skywriting, smoke signals, interpretive dance, starship formations. If it can carry meaning, we'll use it. Vex'thaal deactivated the communicator and stood in silence. Around him, crew members monitored systems, tracked threats, and maintained the dreadnought's operations. None of them understood what he was beginning to grasp. The war wasn't military. It was linguistic. Humanity had shown up in a galaxy that used language for information transfer and immediately started using it for everything else. Art, humor, deception, entertainment, emotional expression, social bonding, tactical coordination. They'd weaponized communication itself. And the sovereignty? They'd been trying to fight a conventional war against opponents who were having a completely different kind of conversation. Sir, Cormix approached cautiously. The hierarchs are demanding Dr. Torres be transferred to the capital world for interrogation. They believe you're being compromised. Compromised. The word carried implications of corruption, of losing objectivity. They weren't wrong. Vex'thaal had started this, wanting to crack a code. Now he was beginning to understand there was no code, just endless layers of meaning, context, and interpretation that humans navigated instinctively, and the sovereignty had never evolved to process. Tell the hierarchs that intelligence extraction is ongoing and relocation would disrupt critical progress. Another diplomatic evasion. Maya would be proud. Commander, they were quite insistent. Then they can be insistent from their comfortable chambers while I deal with the actual situation. His chromatophores flashed irritation patterns. Have they won a single engagement against humanity? No? Then perhaps they should trust the commander who's actually learning something useful? He returned to Maya's chamber. She was teaching irregular verbs to 3 of his junior officers who'd requested additional instruction. They looked simultaneously fascinated and existentially disturbed. Dr. Torres. A moment. She dismissed the officers and turned to face him. Let me guess. High Command wants me delivered to them for proper interrogation and probably dissection. How did you? Because that's what would happen in every bad alien invasion movie humanity's ever made. We've got the script memorized. She leaned back. So what did you tell them? That you're more valuable here. True, but not why you really said no. Those predator eyes fixed on him. You're starting to understand, aren't you? Not just the language, the thinking behind it. Vex'thaal's defensive membranes twitched. I understand that humanity operates on principles fundamentally different from anything the sovereignty has encountered. Specifically, you don't separate communication from existence. Everything is language to you. Every action contains meaning. Every meaning contains multiple interpretations. You've built an entire civilization on calculated ambiguity. Maya smiled. Not the teaching smile. Something else. Pride, maybe. That's better than 90% of xenoanthropologists manage after years of study. You might actually have talent for this, Commander. I'm a military officer. I shouldn't need talent for linguistics. And yet. She pulled up a tactical display showing recent human victories. Here we are. Because the universe doesn't care what you think you should need. She highlighted a battle report. You know what your biggest weakness is? Not technology, not tactics, not even understanding our language. Then what? You think words and meaning are the same thing? You believe communication is about transferring information accurately. She shook her head. But humans know that's not what language is for. Language is for connection, for emotion, for building relationships and establishing identity. Information transfer is just a side effect. Vex'thaal processed this. You're saying the sovereignty uses language wrong. I'm saying you use it differently. And when two species have fundamentally different relationships with communication, the one that understands both perspectives has the advantage. And humanity understands ours? We've been studying you since first contact, learning sovereignty standard, analyzing your cultural frameworks, figuring out how you think. She gestured around the chamber. Meanwhile, you've been trying to crack our language like it's encryption. Different approaches, different results. A cold certainty settled into Vex'thaal's neural network. You're winning because you learned how we communicate. And we're losing because we still don't understand how you do. Bingo. Which means teaching me English doesn't actually matter. Even if I master every word, every grammar rule, every idiom, I'll still miss the essential component, the human context that makes it all work. Maya stood up, walking to the viewport that showed human ships maintaining their patient formation outside. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Commander. Language isn't separate from culture. You can't learn one without the other. So this entire exercise is futile. I didn't say that. She turned back to him. You've learned more in 7 cycles than most xenolinguists manage in months. You're starting to think in multiple contexts simultaneously. You're recognizing patterns in communication beyond pure information content. She moved closer. You're not learning English, Commander. You're learning how to be bilingual between 2 completely different ways of experiencing reality. And that might actually end this war. How? Because right now, both sides think they're having the same fight, but we're not. You see, military conflict. We see something else. A conversation conducted through violence, because we haven't figured out how to talk yet. Vex'thaal felt his worldview rearranging itself. Humans don't want to conquer the sovereignty. Of course not. What would we do with 6,000 years of bureaucratic infrastructure? We'd have to actually administer it. Do you know how boring that sounds? Then, what do you want? Maya smiled. That particular smile that meant he'd finally asked the right question. We want you to stop trying to conquer everyone else. We want the 47 species you've subjugated to have self-determination. We want the sovereignty to join the galactic community instead of trying to rule it. That's not possible. Why not? Because the sovereignty has always expanded. It's our nature, our history, our purpose. And humans have always been tribal, territorial, and violent. Didn't stop us from building a mostly functional civilization. She shrugged. Things change. Species evolve. Not just biologically. Alarm screamed. Both of them snapped to attention as Cormix's voice boomed through communications. Commander! Multiple sovereignty fleets entering the system. Hierarch's personal guard. They're broadcasting override codes and demanding immediate custody of the human prisoner. Maya and Vex'thaal exchanged looks. "Well," she said, "this complicates things." Vex'thaal activated his command interface. "How many ships?" 15 capital vessels, 50 support craft. They're moving into blockade formation around our position. This was it. The moment where command decisions shaped outcomes. Where military doctrine dictated his choices. Except, he'd spent 7 cycles learning that doctrine could be wrong. That different perspectives revealed different options. That communication was more than information transfer. "Cormix, open a channel to the Hierarch fleet." "Sir?" "Do it." The holographic projection materialized. Supreme Hierarch Talmenos himself. One of the oldest members of the Council. 6,000 years of rigid certainty compressed into crystallized neural patterns. "Commander Vex'thaal, you will transfer the human to our custody immediately. Your request is denied. Your authority is suspended. Comply, or face tribunal." Standard sovereignty procedure. Clear, direct, unambiguous. Vex'thaal looked at Maya. She raised an eyebrow. "Your call, Commander." He turned back to the Hierarch. And then, using principles he'd learned from a human teacher in 7 cycles of linguistic chaos, he responded, "With respect, Supreme Hierarch, I must decline." The silence stretched. Talmenos's hologram flickered with what might have been incomprehension. "Explain, Doctor." Maya Torres is providing strategic intelligence that has already yielded breakthrough understanding of human tactical doctrine. Transferring her mid-operation would compromise months of potential progress. I recommend continued operations under current parameters with regular reporting to the Council. Every word, technically, accurate. Every phrase diplomatically phrased. The entire response utterly empty of his actual meaning. He was lying through linguistic misdirection. And it felt absolutely human. Talmenos's chromatophores cycled through several colors. "This is highly irregular. The war is highly irregular, Supreme Hierarch. Conventional approaches have failed. I propose we attempt unconventional solutions." Another long pause. Vex'thaal could feel Maya trying not to laugh behind him. "Very well. You have 10 additional cycles. Then the human comes to the capital world. No exceptions." The communication cut. Vex'thaal turned to Maya. "I just lied to the Supreme Commander of all sovereignty military forces." "Yep. Congratulations. You're becoming fluent in human communication." She grinned. "So, 10 cycles to end a war. Think we can manage it?" "That's impossible. Improbable. There's a difference." She returned to her teaching station. "Now, let's talk about negotiation tactics. Because you're going to need them." "Why?" "Because in 10 cycles, you're going to propose a peace treaty. And I'm going to help you write it in language both species can understand." Outside the viewport, sovereignty fleets surrounded them. Beyond them, human ships waited. And in a converted holding chamber, a xenolinguistics professor prepared to do what no military force had managed. She was going to translate peace. 9 cycles later, Commander Vex'thaal stood before the Council of Hierarchs with a document that would either end the war or end his career. Probably both. "This is your proposed treaty?" Talmenos scanned the data. "It's written in human linguistic structure, with sovereignty concepts integrated throughout. Both languages, both perspectives. Neither dominant. Unacceptable. With respect, Supreme Hierarch, continuing the current war is unacceptable. We're losing. We've been losing. This offers an alternative." Maya sat in the chamber, technically still a prisoner, practically a diplomatic consultant. She'd helped him draft the treaty in 17 versions before they found language that worked. "The humans will never agree to this," another Hierarch interjected. "Captain Wright has already reviewed the proposal. She's bringing it to the Terran Council today." "You've been negotiating with the enemy?" "I've been communicating with potential allies. There's a difference. The chamber erupted in debate. Vex'thaal stood steady, using every technique Maya had taught him. Read the subtext. Understand the emotional content. Recognize that people say things they don't entirely mean. The hierarchs were afraid. All their certainty, crumbling. And fear made species do desperate things. Commander, Talmenos finally spoke. You've spent too much time with the human. Your judgment is compromised. My judgment is informed. I understand our enemy now, which means I understand how to make peace. By capitulating to their demands, by finding common ground neither side knew existed. He pulled up tactical displays. Look at their ship formations. Read what they're actually communicating. They don't want to destroy us. They want us to change. The sovereignty doesn't change. Then, the sovereignty loses. Vex'thaal let that hang in the recycled air. Supreme Hierarch, I've learned something these past cycles. Communication isn't about being understood. It's about understanding. And we never tried to understand humanity. We just tried to defeat them. Talmenos's chromatophores shifted to colors Vex'thaal had never seen. Uncertainty, perhaps. If we agree to this treaty, if we recognize the independence of subjugated species, if we limit expansion, what does the sovereignty become? Something new, something different, something that survives. The council deliberated. Maya sat quietly, waiting. Finally, Talmenos spoke. We will consider the proposal. Provide the human safe transport to her government. Await their response. If both sides agree. He paused. Then perhaps your unconventional approach has merit. Vex'thaal felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. 3 cycles later, he stood on the observation deck, watching Maya's transport prepare for departure. The treaty was in negotiation, both governments circling the language carefully, looking for traps. They'd find none. Maya had been thorough. So, she stood beside him, ready to leave. You learned English. I learned enough to know I'll never really understand it. That's the most human thing you've said yet. She smiled. You've got my contact information. If the treaty fails, if the war continues, call me. We'll try again. And if it succeeds? Then you've got a standing invitation to Earth. I teach advanced xenolinguistics at Cambridge. You'd make a fascinating guest lecturer. I'm a military commander. You're a student. Same as me. Same as everyone who actually wants to understand anything. She extended her hand. It's been educational, Commander. He grasped her hand in the human fashion. You're a dangerous person, Dr. Torres. All good teachers are. The transport launched. Vex'thaal watched it disappear into the void, carrying a human who'd turned capture into cooperation. Cormix approached. Sir, message from the hierarchs. They're ratifying the treaty, pending human approval. And the humans? Captain Wright reports Terran Council unanimous approval. They're calling it the Torres Accords. Of course they were. Vex'thaal activated a communication channel. Dr. Torres, if you're monitoring this frequency. Her voice came back immediately. I'm listening. Thank you. A pause. Then her laugh, warm and genuine. You're welcome. Now go build peace, Commander. And remember, it's not about the words. It's about what they mean. The channel closed. Vex'thaal stood alone on the observation deck, looking at stars that suddenly seemed less hostile. The war was ending. Not through conquest, through comprehension. He'd learned English, sort of, barely. Enough to know he'd be studying it forever. But more importantly, he'd learned that understanding was more powerful than force. That communication could achieve what weapons couldn't. That sometimes the most effective military strategy was to stop fighting and start talking. Humanity had taught the sovereignty something profound. Not through violence, through conversation. And in the vast darkness of space, Commander Vex'thaal smiled. A human gesture. Carrying meaning that needed no translation. Hope.